the point is that we were what they called a dissident organization, and we had been fighting the British, and the relations between us were such that although the British nowadays, of course, everybody will tell you, of course, the British were awful, they were terrible, they were oppressing us, we had to get rid of them somehow. We fought against them, they didn't. They fought against us. They handed over some of our people whom they could catch. They handed them over to the British, who sent them, many of them, to camps in Africa. They deported them, exiled them, some people for years. That was the state of the relationship between us and the Haganah, except for one period at the end of 1946 and the middle of 1947. There was cooperation between the two organizations because, contrary to their hopes, the new Labour government, you may remember that soon after the war, Churchill lost the election and the Labour Party took over, and the Labour Party in Israel believed that now there would be a friendly government, but in fact we had a much worse government and worse attitude under Labour than we'd had before. You may remember the name of Ernest Bevin, who was an anti-Semite, and as a matter of fact, Attlee, the Prime Minister, also turned out to be most unfriendly to the Jews. And they discovered that the promises that they thought that had been made to them, had been made to the Zionist movement, that we would get a fairer deal from them than Israel, than the Zionist organization had before. Contrary to their hopes and their expectations, the British policy became even sharper, more sharply against us. It was then that the Haganah agreed to start in cooperation with the Irgun and the Lehi, smaller organization, to work together in fighting against the British. And in fact, for several months, the British had to endure attacks against the installations. Not a question of fighting in the field against roads, bridges, railways, and so on. They had to face the three organizations working together. But up to that time, the Jewish Agency, that is the Zionist organization, had continuously attacked us, in propaganda, in whatever way they could, and as I said, they'd even helped send our members abroad, had always said that they were against the Irgun and against the Lehi. They wanted the British they would help the British to destroy us. And suddenly, the British became aware, it wasn't so difficult, that they were actually working with us. So the British made it their business to arrest as many of the leaders of the organization, of the Zionist organization, as they could. The Haganah people they couldn't catch. The Haganah people also went underground. And so for those months, while we were fighting, the British decided to take action against the agency, against the Zionist leaders, and they arrested them and put them in a camp at Latrun, which was a military camp, prison camp, quite near Tel Aviv, Latrun, near Ramle, near Lod, as a matter of fact. And they didn't stand it for long. After a couple of months of imprisonment there, they agreed to stop their share in the fighting. And so it started all over again until the Alkalena came. But the fact that they had actually cooperated with the Irgun in fighting the British naturally had its significance not only to the British, but had its significance in the public here. The public here had been talked and propagandized against us for years, that we were harming the Jewish people, we were destroying the hope of Zionism and so on. And suddenly the Jewish agency, the Zionist organization, was putting its own force together with the Irgun, which made a sea change, as you might call it, in the attitude of many people in the country, who had really believed that the Irgun was a dangerous organization for the Jewish people. And so, by the time this is the middle of 1947, and we're talking about the middle of 1948, the war, the riots here with the Arabs before the actual war began started as soon as the United Nations decided on the recommended partition in November 47. After November 47, between November 47 and May 48, when the British left, the Arab states didn't attack us, but they were attacks by the local Arabs. Well, after the state was established, or rather after the British, the state was going to be established, after the United Nations decision, the Jerusalem contingent of the Irgun and the Jerusalem contingent of the Haganah and the contingent of the Alehi all continued to operate inside Jerusalem with the intention of remaining there, continuing the fight for as long as need be. We knew that the Arab states were going to invade us. At any rate, the Irgun knew that was so. The Irgun announced that they knew that the Arabs would attack us as soon as the British army left, and it was generally understood that that's what was going to happen. And so we knew too that we'd have to continue after the state was established as an independent unit. That the Haganah and the government didn't like, but as the government itself, after the state, even before the state was established, they didn't dare start a fight with us in Jerusalem, because they had lost so much of their prestige because of their being able to work with us in 1947, that they should start now hindering or preventing us from staying, working independently in Jerusalem. That made it possible for the Irgun still to bring arms and insist that 20% should go to the Irgun in Jerusalem. So our people were fighting, and some being killed in Jerusalem as part of the war with the Arabs. The atmosphere as between us and the Haganah had become much easier after the so-called United Resistance Movement had gone out of existence. I should add that in this United Resistance Movement in 1947, we accepted the overall leadership of the Haganah. In other words, each of our organizations continued to operate in its own way and choose its targets and so on, but the targets had to be approved by the leaders of the Haganah. That's why there was such great agitation about the King David Hotel, which we blew up, and almost 100 people were killed inside. Now, we had warned the British authorities. They'd been telephoned. There had been telephone calls to the British embassy, to the British government, and to the French embassy, the French consulate in Jerusalem, who were very near the King David Hotel, that they should open their windows. They didn't want the windows could have been blown out through blast, and so there was enough evidence to show that there had been a warning. In fact, there were newspaper men, what was his name, Edward Morrow, for example, of America, who were on the spot. They knew there was going to be an attack on the hotel because they'd also heard this warning. The British at first denied that they had ever been warned. In fact, but we heard from the leader of the Haganah, who had friends who happened to be in the building. You know, quite a few Jews killed there. That the chief secretary, let's say the equivalent of the prime minister of the British administration, had said, I don't accept warnings from the Irgun. I don't accept orders from the Irgun. I only give orders. And so he refused to convey this warning to the people who were in the hotel. Well, they didn't take the warning, and a lot of people were killed. Some of them, we had people of our own in the hotel, in the administration. We had friends in the administration. There were Jews who worked for the government, but they were friends of ours. So we had no reason to have people killed there. In fact, this was the firm policy. We certainly, except perhaps in the early days, there was never any attack on individuals. We attacked only installations. As I said before, railways, camps, headquarters, the local headquarters, and so on. If you were to make a list of the attacks we carried out, there were no attacks on soldiers or people like that. People got killed. Our people also got killed. We lost 400 people in our activities, and several Britishers also killed. Some of them were killed while in the installation. For example, the officers. Was an officers' kind of recreation unit, I think, in Jerusalem, opposite the Jewish Agency building, where we carried out, blew it up with due warning, but nobody paid attention to it. But there were such cases where people were killed. Well, but we didn't make them targets. We didn't make them targets.